I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 29 years old. Last Thanksgiving, my Aunt Carol stood up at our family dinner in front of 14 relatives and announced that my late Uncle Ben had always thought I was, quote, a disappointment who'd never amount to anything. She said it while pouring herself more wine, smiling that tight little smile she'd perfected over the years. The table went completely silent. My mom dropped her fork, but I just looked at Carol, tilted my head slightly, and said, "That's interesting, because Uncle Ben told me something very different just 3 weeks before he died." Her smile faltered just for a second, and I saw something flash across her face. Panic, maybe. The next morning, she sent me 6 text messages, each one angrier than the last. I didn't respond to a single one. Instead, I drove to a storage facility on Route 12 in Westchester County, the one with the orange doors and the 24-hour access code, and I opened Unit 73 with a key I'd been carrying in my wallet for 4 months. Inside that unit was a single cardboard box, and inside that box was enough evidence to blow apart everything Carol had been building since the moment my uncle's heart stopped beating. Before I tell you exactly what was in that box, take a second to like and subscribe, but honestly, only if this story genuinely resonates with you, and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from right now. Now, let me take you back to July, the day everything started to unravel. My Uncle Ben died on a Tuesday morning, heart attack, massive, sudden, no warning. He was 64 years old. I got the call from Carol at 7:42 a.m. I was getting ready for work, blow-drying my hair in my tiny studio apartment in White Plains. The dryer was so loud I almost didn't hear my phone buzzing. When I finally picked up, Carol's voice was strange. Not crying, not even shaky, just flat. "Sarah, it's Ben. He's gone. Heart attack this morning. You should probably come to the house." That was it. No emotion, no details. Just clinical facts delivered like she was reading from a script. I drove to their house in Scarsdale in a fog, my hands numb on the steering wheel. When I arrived, Carol was in the kitchen, surrounded by her bridge club friends, all of them in athleisure wear and full makeup at 8:30 in the morning. She was drinking coffee, laughing quietly at something someone said. Laughing. My cousin Ryan, Carol's son from her first marriage, was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I walked in, gave me a quick nod, then went right back to his screen. I stood in the doorway, clutching my purse, and nobody even acknowledged I was there. The funeral was 4 days later. Small, tasteful, at a Presbyterian church that Uncle Ben had never once attended in his life. He'd been Catholic, like my mom, like me. But Carol had insisted on her church. Ryan gave the eulogy. 8 minutes about legacy and hard work and being a man of principle. He mentioned me exactly 0 times. Afterward, at the reception in the church basement, Carol pulled me aside near the dessert table. Her eyes were dry. Her lipstick was perfect. "Sarah," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "I know you and Ben were close, but I need you to understand something. He left very specific instructions. Everything goes through me now. You don't need to worry about complicated financial matters or business decisions. You've got your little nonprofit job. That's enough for you, right?" I felt my jaw tighten. Uncle Ben had told me explicitly that I was in his will, that he'd made sure I'd be taken care of. "Carol," I said carefully, "Ben told me he'd arranged something for me. He said—" "Oh, sweetie," she interrupted, patting my arm like I was a confused child. Ben was on so much medication those last few months, blood pressure pills, cholesterol meds, anxiety medication. He wasn't thinking clearly. You can't take everything he said seriously. He wasn't on medication when he told me. Her smile didn't waver. Well, grief makes us remember things differently, doesn't it? Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. She walked away before I could respond, and I stood there, alone, my hands shaking so badly I had to set down my coffee cup. I was about to leave when an older man approached me. He was maybe 70, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive but not flashy. He handed me a business card. The name on it read, Thomas Brennan, Esquire, Estate Planning and Trust Administration. Your uncle, he said quietly, spoke about you often, very often. I'll be reaching out soon, Miss Mitchell. Don't do anything rash in the meantime. And then he was gone. That evening, 17 of us gathered back at Uncle Ben and Carol's house, a sprawling colonial in Scarsdale with a circular driveway and a 3-car garage. Carol had redecorated the entire place after marrying Ben, erased every single trace of his first wife, my Aunt Linda, who died of cancer 12 years earlier. The dining room was now all white and gray, sterile and cold. Carol sat at the head of the table, in Ben's chair, like she'd been doing it her whole life. I want everyone to know, she announced, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin, that Ben left everything very clearly outlined. The house stays with me. The business, well, Ryan will be taking over the consulting firm. And Sarah. She turned to me, her expression patronizing. Sarah, honey, Ben wanted to make sure you understood that your job at that little community center is wonderful, truly, but you shouldn't expect any complications. Your family, of course, but Ben was practical about these things. My cousin Ryan smirked into his wine glass. I set my fork down. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Ben told me he'd made arrangements for me. Specific arrangements. Carol's smile turned cold. Well, unfortunately, what Ben may have said and what's actually legally binding are two very different things. I have the will, Sarah. I've seen it. You're not prominently featured. The words landed like a punch. I see. I'm sure you do, Carol said, turning back to her plate. Let's not ruin dinner. I excused myself, walked upstairs to the guest bathroom, and locked the door. My hands were trembling. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I sat on the edge of the tub and tried to breathe. And then I remembered something. 3 weeks before he died, Uncle Ben had asked me to come over on a Sunday afternoon. Carol had been at some charity luncheon. We'd sat in his study, the one with the leather chairs and the wall of bookshelves he'd built himself. Sarah, he'd said, his voice quieter than usual, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Okay. Carol doesn't know this, and she can't know. Not yet. But I've made arrangements. For you. For your future. There are things I've set aside. Legal things. Protected things. Uncle Ben, what are you talking about? He'd pulled out a small brass key from his desk drawer and pressed it into my palm. This is for a storage unit, Unit 73 at the Store Safe facility on Route 12. Everything you need is in there. Documents, evidence, recordings, everything. Recordings? His face had looked tired. Sad. Carol's been planning this for a while, Sarah. Longer than I wanted to admit. I installed cameras. I hired someone to monitor things. I kept records. I know what she's doing, and I know what she's going to try to do after I'm gone. I don't understand. You will, he'd said, squeezing my hand. When the time comes, you'll understand. I've hired an attorney, Thomas Brennan. He'll contact you. Don't trust Carol. Don't trust Ryan. Just trust the process, okay? I'd left that day confused, holding a storage unit key, thinking maybe he was on too much medication. Maybe he was just paranoid. But now, sitting in that bathroom, listening to Carol's fake laughter drifting up the stairs, I knew he'd been right. I drove back to my apartment that night, the key burning a hole in my pocket. The first thing I did was hide it inside a tampon box in my bathroom cabinet, because if anyone came snooping, they sure as hell weren't going to look there. The second thing I did was wait for Thomas Brennan to call. He called 3 days later. Miss Mitchell, this is Thomas Brennan. We met briefly at your uncle's funeral. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Yes, I can. Good. Bring the key your uncle gave you. You're going to need it. The next morning, I walked into the offices of Brennan and Associates, a small firm tucked into a brick building in downtown White Plains. The receptionist led me into a corner office with dark wood paneling and framed law degrees on the walls. Thomas Brennan stood up from behind his desk. He was smaller than I remembered, maybe 5'8", but he had this presence. Calm. Steady. "Sarah," he said, shaking my hand, "thank you for coming. Please sit." I sat. My palms were sweating. "Mr. Brennan, I don't understand what's happening." "I know, and I'm going to explain everything. Your uncle came to me 14 months ago. He was very concerned about his wife's behavior. He believed she was manipulating finances, preparing to cut you out of his estate entirely, and, potentially, planning to contest any will that didn't favor her completely. Wait, Carol's been—" "Yes, your uncle hired a private investigator. He installed cameras in his home office. He kept meticulous financial records, and he created an irrevocable trust, separate from his will, specifically to protect assets meant for you." He slid a document across the desk. The header read, "Irrevocable Trust Agreement, Benjamin Paul Mitchell, Grantor." Halfway down the page, in bold letters, "Primary beneficiary, Sarah Ann Mitchell." I stared at the words. My throat closed. What does this mean?" "It means," Brennan said gently, "that your uncle set aside $250,000 in a trust fund for you. He also left you his car, a 1967 Mustang he restored himself, currently in storage, and a portfolio of investments worth approximately $180,000, all protected, irrevocable. Carol can't touch any of it." I couldn't breathe. But Carol said, "Carol lied, and she's going to keep lying until the will is read publicly, which happens next Thursday at 10 a.m. in probate court. Until then, she thinks she's won." What about the business? The house?" "The business goes to Ryan as originally planned. The house goes to Carol. But everything else, the things that matter, the things your uncle wanted you to have, those are protected." "She's going to fight this." "Oh, absolutely," Brennan said with a grim smile, "which is why your uncle documented everything. The cameras caught Carol moving money, forging signatures on documents, and telling Ryan explicitly that they needed to make sure you got nothing. We have hours of footage, Sarah. Hours." "Oh my God, your uncle loved you. He saw what was happening, and he built a fortress around you. Now we just have to hold the line." That week was the longest of my life. I went to work, taught art classes to kids at the community center, smiled and nodded and pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was a live wire. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, playing through every conversation I'd ever had with Carol, every condescending comment, every time she'd made me feel invisible. I kept thinking about Uncle Ben, about the cameras, about Carol's face when she'd called me sweetie and patted my arm like I was stupid. I thought about that Thanksgiving dinner, about the way she'd announced to everyone that I was a disappointment, like it was a fact, like it was something Uncle Ben had actually said. The rage I felt it was consuming. On Wednesday night, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the storage facility. It was nearly 9 p.m., dark, the parking lot almost empty. I punched in the access code with trembling fingers. The gate rolled open with a metallic screech. I walked down the long corridor of orange doors, my footsteps echoing until I reached Unit 73. I used the key, the lock clicked open. I pulled up the door, and there it was, a single cardboard box sitting in the middle of an otherwise empty unit. I knelt down in front of it, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were 3 USB drives, each one carefully labeled in Uncle Ben's neat handwriting. Office Cam March, Office Cam April, Office Cam May. A thick folder with bank statements, pages and pages of them, showing money being transferred out of joint accounts into accounts with only Carol's name. Highlighted sections, post-it notes with Uncle Ben's comments. "She thinks I don't notice. Third transfer this month." a notarized affidavit from Uncle Ben dated 6 months before his death, stating he was of sound mind and body, and that Carol was attempting to coerce him into signing documents he did not agree with. And at the bottom of the box, a handwritten letter. The paper was slightly yellowed, the ink a little smudged in places, like maybe he'd been crying when he wrote it. Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And Carol is already doing what I knew she'd do. She's always been good at playing the victim, at making people feel small, at rewriting history to suit her needs. I let it go on too long. I was tired, I was sick, and I didn't want to fight. But I couldn't let her erase you. You're the only family I have left who reminds me of Linda, of the person I used to be before Carol came into my life. The videos will show you everything. Watch them. You need to see what she's really like. The money is yours. The car is yours. Don't let her take them. Don't let her make you feel like you're not worth it. You are. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better while I was alive. I'm doing it now. I love you, kiddo. Always did. Uncle Ben. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit, clutching the letter, and I sobbed. Ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that echoed off the metal walls. Because he'd seen me, he'd known, and he'd fought for me when I didn't even know I needed it. Thursday morning, 10 a.m., Westchester County Probate Court. I barely slept the night before. I changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on a simple navy dress and flats. Nothing flashy, nothing that would make Carol think I was trying too hard. The hearing room was small, wood-paneled, fluorescent lights humming overhead, rows of benches like a church. It smelled like old paper and floor polish. Carol arrived with Ryan and her attorney, a sharp-looking woman in a gray pantsuit named Diane Kowalski. Carol was wearing all black, expensive black, designer black, like she was still in mourning. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was perfect. She looked like a grieving widow who'd done nothing wrong. She saw me sitting with Thomas Brennan in the front row, and she smiled. Not a big smile, just a small, tight, victorious little smile, like she'd already won. Like this was just a formality. Ryan didn't even look at me. He sat down next to his mother, pulled out his phone, and started scrolling. The probate judge entered, a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair, reading glasses perched on his nose, and a no-nonsense expression that said he'd seen every kind of family drama imaginable and was not impressed by any of it. "We're here for the reading of the last will and testament of Benjamin Paul Mitchell," he said, settling into his chair. "Proceed." Diane Kowalski stood first. She was confident, polished. She smiled at the judge like they were old friends. "Your Honor, the estate is straightforward. Mr. Mitchell left his business to his stepson, Ryan Dalton. The family home and all remaining assets, including financial accounts, are bequeathed to his wife, Carol Ann Mitchell." Thomas Brennan stood up, slowly, deliberately. "Objection, Your Honor." The room went silent. Kowalski blinked. Her smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "Objection," Brennan repeated, his voice calm, steady, like he was discussing the weather. "The will Ms. Kowalski is referencing does not reflect Mr. Mitchell's final wishes. Mr. Mitchell executed a revised will and irrevocable trust 14 months prior to his death, copies of which I'm submitting to the court now." He handed a thick stack of documents to the bailiff, who carried them to the judge's bench. Carol's face went from confident to confused to white. Bone white. That's not possible," she said, her voice rising. "Ben never—" "Mrs. Mitchell," the judge said sharply, looking up from the documents, "you'll have your opportunity to speak. Be seated." Carol sat, but her hands were shaking. I could see them from where I was sitting. Brennan continued, his tone professional, almost bored. "Your Honor, the revised documents clearly state that a cash trust of $250,000, a restored 1967 Ford Mustang, and an investment portfolio valued at $180,000 are to be transferred to Mr. Mitchell's niece, Sarah Ann Mitchell. The business, Collins Consulting, goes to Ryan Dalton as previously agreed. Mrs. Mitchell receives the family home and a one-time settlement of $75,000. Nothing further. Carol shot to her feet. "This is fraud!" she shouted. "He was sick. He wasn't in his right mind. He didn't know what he was doing." "He was evaluated by his primary physician," Brennan said, pulling out more papers, "and certified mentally competent. The affidavit is attached." Kowalski was flipping through the documents, her expression going from confident to panicked. "Your Honor, we were never informed." "Because you weren't his estate attorney," Brennan interrupted smoothly. "I was, and Mr. Mitchell specifically requested that these changes remain confidential to avoid interference." The judge read in silence. It felt like hours. Finally, he looked up. "These documents appear to be in order. The trust is irrevocable, properly witnessed and notarized. Mrs. Mitchell, do you have evidence to the contrary?" Carol's mouth opened and closed. He wouldn't. He loved me." "That's not evidence," the judge said. "Miss Kowalski?" Kowalski looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. "No, Your Honor." The judge closed the folder. "Then the revised will and trust are upheld. The estate will be distributed as outlined. Court adjourned." The gavel fell. Carol screamed. Not words, just sound. Raw, furious, desperate sound. Ryan grabbed her arm, trying to calm her, but she shoved him away and pointed at me. "You," she hissed, "you poisoned him against me. You manipulated him. I stood up slowly. My hands were shaking, but my voice was rock steady. "I didn't have to manipulate him, Carol. He had cameras." Her face froze. "What?" "Cameras," I repeated. "In his office, watching you, recording you, for months. He knew exactly what you were doing." She stared at me, the color draining from her face. "We'll contest this," Kowalski said quickly, grabbing Carol's arm. "We'll take this to appeals. You'll lose," Brennan said mildly. "The trust is airtight, and we have video evidence of Mrs. Mitchell engaging in financial misconduct and attempting to coerce Mr. Mitchell into changing his will in her favor. You're welcome to try, but I'll bury you in discovery before you get anywhere close to overturning it." Carol turned and stormed out. Ryan followed, his face red, his shoulders hunched. Kowalski grabbed her briefcase and hurried after them, muttering something about appeals and motions. And I stood there, shaking, barely able to breathe. My legs felt like jelly. My hands were numb. Brennan put a hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Sarah." "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you." "Thank your uncle," he said softly. "He's the one who did the hard part." 2 months later, the money transferred into my account. I remember staring at my phone, at the notification from the bank, at the number with all those zeros, and I just cried. Not happy tears, not sad tears, just overwhelmed tears. The Mustang was delivered to a garage near my apartment on a Thursday afternoon. It was cherry red, freshly waxed, gleaming in the sunlight. The mechanic handed me the keys and said, "Your uncle took real good care of this car, miss. Real good care." I sat in the driver's seat, ran my hands over the steering wheel, and I could almost feel Uncle Ben sitting next to me, grinning, telling me to give her some gas, kiddo. Carol moved out of the house within a week of the court ruling. She sold it for an obscene amount of money, bought a condo in Florida, and never spoke to me again. Ryan unfriended me on Facebook, blocked me on Instagram, deleted my number. I didn't care. I genuinely didn't care. I used part of the trust to pay off my student loans, all $43,000 of them. I put another chunk into a high-yield savings account. I invested the rest, carefully, conservatively, following the advice of a financial planner Brennan recommended. I still work at the community center because I love my job. I love the kids. I love teaching them how to mix colors, how to see shapes, how to express themselves when words aren't enough. Money doesn't change who you are. It just gives you options, security, freedom, the knowledge that you don't have to stay in situations that make you small, And every Sunday, I drive the Mustang. I take it out on back roads, windows down, music loud, and I think about Uncle Ben, about the man who saw what was happening, who documented it, who planned ahead, who built a legal fortress around me because he knew I'd need it. I think about the letter he wrote me, the one I keep in a safe deposit box now, the one I reread sometimes when I'm feeling lost. "You are worth it," he wrote. "Don't let her make you feel like you're not. That's the inheritance that changed my life, not the money, not the car, not the house Carol lost or the trust fund or the investments, the knowledge, deep and unshakable and permanent, that I was worth the trouble, that someone saw me, really saw me, and loved me enough to fight for me, even after he was gone. I'm not telling you this to teach you a lesson. Every family has its own battles, its own betrayals. But here's what I know now. Silence is an agreement. I spent years being the polite niece, the good girl, the one who didn't make waves, and Carol took that silence and called it weakness. It wasn't. It was just a woman who hadn't found her evidence yet. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story made you feel something, anger, hope, recognition, then it did exactly what I needed it to do. Hit like if it resonated, subscribe if you want more stories like this, and check the description below for another story I think you'll appreciate. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I'm finally free.